All right, everybody, welcome back. We're going to talk about the 5 sexes revisited today. This one should be in your textbook, and the pages are listed on the syllabus. So let's go ahead and get started. On my screen, we're back to this. We're going to go ahead and get into the parts that we need to do. All right, so here are the key takeaways, and we're going to be pretty brief about this, but I want to hammer home the things that I want you to get out of this and the things that need to be mentioned, right? The things that are important. First of all, I want to talk about revisiting research, right? As we move through our academic forefront, sometimes we have a very important piece of information, as did the author of this text. And they really worked on talking about how sex is, well, they introduced what would be considered a 5-sex system and talking about how there was variation. What they were really talking about is that there's variation. There's variation between how we understand sex, how we understand gender, how these things are interacting, right? And how they interact with even sexuality to an extent in the original. What they wanted to do is they came back is when they got a lot of pushback, both from academics and intersex individual resource groups, and as they talked about and got pushback from other communities that were more conservative, that were very unsure of what the messages were that were trying to be sent were. They wanted to revisit it and kind of make known or make understood the real key points they were trying to make, and fix a few of the things that they wanted to fix. They even talk about some of the terminology they use and how there's a lot of individuals in the intersex community that would find those very derogatory and have been used as on a more societal level as derogatory statements towards these individuals. And so we want to make sure that we are talking through. Also, as we talk about this, the term intersex individual really claims that this thing is the primary part of that individual. So as we've read and as I've read and other things, there's a wide debate on what it is and how they need to be, what the terminology needs to be. Person with an intersex trait is the most widely accepted. However, intersex persons is still used in a wide variety of contexts. And so either one of those, as you talk through this in this class, will be acceptable. But understand that if you come in contact with someone who does have an intersex variation or trait, they can determine what their terminology is and how they want to approach that, or even if they want to tell you, because most of the time you would have no clue. So we want to make sure that we're being mindful that a person's personal choices about their terminology always come first, especially if they are expressed to you. Make sure that you respect those. However, for this class, intersex persons and or a more preferably person with an intersex trait is the terms that we will be using. Okay, and part of that is what she revisited when she wrote this, is that she wanted to make sure that we understood that sometimes we need to go back. Sometimes language changes. Sometimes we get more research and we hammer down more on statistics. Sometimes we need to harp into the social context and really harp into messaging about a specific oppressive thing that is happening so that we can provide context for that. And that's really what happened when we revisited this and when we wrote this, or when she wrote this. Okay. So an intersex, a person with an intersex trait, let's define that real quick. We talked about in the last video the different, like, what sex means, and sex is a biological category that is constructed through our understandings of the human body, which again is ever changing. The more we learn about genetics, about chromosome research, about even about hormonal research, and even about anatomy, right? All of these things still hold a lot of mysteries to us as scientists, and we need to understand that they are ever changing. Okay. But basically, an intersex or a person with an intersex trait, the intersex trait is some kind of variation between what we have referred to as traditionally female or traditionally male in the terms of sex. So that is, we have a hormone range that we associate with female with male. We have chromosomal ranges. We have a chromosome that type that specifically female or specifically male. We have human anatomy that we associate with being female. We have human anatomy that we associate with being male. There's variations, right? The point of this is that not everybody falls in an either or category, and that the people in between there can fall on one or the other or multiple of those variations, right? So hormone levels don't necessarily have impact on anatomy changes. They might fall into a specific category in one thing, but not the other. Some people may not ever know because they may not ever need to get genetically tested to find out, or they may not need to ever get their hormones tested because they're never questioned in that way, right? There are things that we're also learning that there's overlap, right? Especially when it comes to hormonal variations. Those things are overlapping the more we learn about human anatomy and human variation. And so we need to make sure that we're paying very close attention to understanding that this is something that happens. And with a decent amount of frequency. So it's the ballpark estimate is a 1.7% of the population. So that's almost 2 of every 100 people you meet. That's an important understanding. Also, due to the fact that a majority of people are never questioned this way or never need to medically understand themselves in a chromosomal way or a genetic way, or even to have their hormone levels questioned, right? So there's a wide variation of between definitions of what falls into this category. There's a wide, especially internationally, understanding of these things. And that makes the measurement itself and the statistic itself kind of vary depending on context, and also means that it is probably much higher than 1.7. Now, not significantly higher. We're not talking about like 30% of the population. That's not what I'm saying. Let me be very clear. But the statistic that we will use at this point is 1.7% of the population. Okay. So we also need to understand, and we've talked kind of about the variation in sex and how it and why it matters. We also need to understand that intersex is a very individualized situation, and the likelihood that you will know that a person is intersex, or even maybe the person, because there has been a lot of decades where that has been kept secret even from the person, and only the parents and the doctors at birth knew, and or moving forward. And it was a lot of secrecy around it for a lot of decades, because it was felt to be shameful. Now, again, as we've moved past that and need to continue to move past the point of that, we need to understand that most of these individuals you would never know unless you're going around and testing people's hormonal levels, their genetic makeup, and or like examining their anatomy. That is not something any of us are doing on a regular basis, so it's not something that we may ever know about a person unless they disclose this, and or unless you are very intimate with that person in a particular way. This has historic roots in serious oppression, especially when it comes to medically. There is a wide array of accounts, and a very high percentage of intersex individuals have experienced this, of medical intervention in the form of changes to their physical anatomy at a very, very young age, with very limited, if even very limited consent or no consent, and more likely even sometimes not even knowledge of that process happening until they get older and things are not making sense. And that is very much touched on in the 5 sexes. But I want you to understand that while they bring in specific examples of how that has negative outcomes, and those examples are more representative of a larger population. It didn't just happen that one time with the example that they're using. This is a systemic problem within the medical industry and how they have treated intersex individuals or individuals with the intersex traits throughout our history of medical implications, right? And this holds long-term implications. The secrecy surrounding their own body, surrounding their own medical histories, has massive implications for those individuals when they do find out, or if something comes up later in life. Not knowing your medical history is very, 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 very dangerous. Also, as we move into this, it has implications into gender. If you gender a baby that has these kind of individual like variations in a way that is incongruent with who they feel like they need to express, it can cause a lot of harm. And really what this boils down to is coming into the current social movements and the current atmosphere around this, is that the research shows, the evidence shows that doing these medical procedures without the ability to have, for those individuals to have consent at an age when consent is not possible at birth to very, very young, without them understanding what their body is very harmful. And so there's a lot of medical groups, a lot of intersex individuals that have worked together, parents that have worked together to make changes so that unless it is medically necessary to create a body function that is currently used in an infant, like their ability to urinate or something to that measure, those variations and those things aren't going to cause harm. Because let's face it, no one's going around and telling or like asking kids to, and no one should be, asking kids to show what those variations are or would even know, because those kids, again, are not going to be put in a place where their bodies are examined in that way. And then if they choose to have those procedures at a later point, then that is something that they can choose as it is congruent with who they are and who they express that they are. And that is very, very important. So we want to end the body changes, especially through hormones and especially through that lovely puberty stage. And those things can have an impact on hormone levels, on which things become more present as how that might impact what anatomy we want to keep. And again, I want to be very clear. People with intersex trait don't always have anatomical differences from those binary categories. Those binary categories can still hold true for some parts of those things we were talking about, the list of things and biological traits, and not with others. So I don't want you to think that every intersex person has anatomy that is different or that would be very easy to spot. That's not the case. But I do want to impose that it is incredibly inappropriate and disrespectful to a human to make major changes to their body without having consent. And that's something that almost all the social science and almost all the research has now shown is incredibly harmful and needs to be stopped. So that is kind of where a movement is, and this is kind of visiting and touching on this subject. If you want to learn more, I have an entire book that is beautifully written by a sociologist who did a lot of research within those kind of networks, within the medical industry that treat these individuals, within the individuals themselves, and within the individuals' parents, and really explores this topic at a very real level. So if you would like, I will go ahead and write in, or you can email me and I will give you that resource too, because it is beautiful. All right. So that's that, and we'll get into the next reading at the next video. Thank you so much. I hope you have a great day.